next speaker is Sarah Larson, who's going to talk to us about the Amana colonies.
Hi, so my name is Sarah Larson. I'm a history major here at Hamilton College. But unlike the person who went before me, I don't study the history of the universe. I thankfully only have to study the past 100 years. So the question I set out to answer in my senior thesis was why the Amana colonies decided to incorporate in 1932. For those of you that don't know, the Amana colonies are a utopian society actually now in Des Moines, Iowa. You can still visit them today. And in 1932, the church leadership made the decision to transform their society from a communally based one where they shared everything, they made everything, there was no private property, to a private corporation. And the church was essentially detached from the governing apparatus of the society. So in order to investigate this question, I took a normal historical approach and I looked at both primary and secondary sources. For those of you that don't know, primary sources are the sorts of things that civilizations and people leave behind, the actual physical materials, such as private papers, newspapers, recordings, real photographs. And thankfully, at Hamilton College on the 3rd floor of the library, we have the largest collection of utopian archives in America. So all of the research that I needed was literally right here on the Hill. So I'm going to talk to you about 5 different sources that I looked at and the results that I found. The first thing I looked at was the museum. So I actually traveled to Amana, which is in my home state, Iowa, and I visited with the scholars there and looked at the museum archives. And they tell a very specific narrative, but at the same time, as Sabrina, or who was over them? Somebody brought up, narratives are obviously kind of detached from reality sometimes. So that was a sketchy source to look at, the museum archives. The other thing I looked at was newspapers. And newspapers are good, but newspapers often tell us more about the audience that they're written for or the writer themselves than the actual event. The other thing I looked at was the private papers of the church elite officials. I looked at the document of incorporation itself, and I also looked at several different secondary sources from historians who have written on the incorporation. In a nutshell, my finding was this, that Amana had to incorporate in order to save the church. After 88 years of communal living communally had become a burden to the church. No longer was renouncing private property actually increasing piety. It was becoming burdensome. Young people were leaving. Church members were getting in discrepancies about where to go economically. So it ended up being a very complicated problem. I suppose the significance of my entire research project is the story of history itself. It really focuses the question of how are things remembered? How will you be remembered? Will I understand you from a museum, from a newspaper, or will I have to ask you?